Welcome to France 24's debate. We consider tonight the question of Libya. Egypt has dropped its bid for an international intervention across the border in Libya just ahead of a UN Security Council meeting. It's being held this evening to discuss the growing chaos. On Monday, Egypt had carried out airstrikes against Islamic State targets after the beheadings of 21 Egyptian nationals in Libya over the weekend. It's now dropped its call for an international intervention. Others, though, are calling for something short of that. Italy wants action in the shape of an agreed ceasefire and of the training for local forces. And Arab states are asking for an end to the embargo that's still in place on weapons sales to the Libyan government in order to help it in its fight against the Islamic State organization. Well, that's the subject of tonight's debate. I'm joined here in the newsroom by William Jordan, who is a former U.S. State Department official. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Also here in the newsroom is Mohamed El-Alfy, a political analyst. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Dominique TRINQUAND is with me as well, former head of French military missions and expert on United Nations peacekeeping operations. We're also going to be joined from Tobruk in eastern Libya, the seat, of course, of that internationally recognized government, by a journalist there, Mohamed El-Alfy, who's with us as well. Just before we get into the details of what's going on tonight at the Security Council and the question of that Islamic State group footprint in the country, here's a look at what was the the state of Libya's political chaos even before the UN Security Council decided to meet and discuss it.
An arms bazaar. That's how security analysts have described Libya, a country that's fallen into anarchy since Colonel Gaddafi was overthrown with international help in October 2011. Anti-Gaddafi militias played a key role in deposing the long-standing ruler. But once their common enemy was defeated, these armed groups, there are now up to 1,700 of them split across regional and political lines, turned on one another. In June 2014, the country held its second post-revolution elections, but with the losers refusing to accept the outcome, Libya was plunged yet further into lawlessness. Two governments are currently claiming legitimacy in Libya. The winners of last year's election are based in Tobruk, with Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Thani broadly aligned with anti-Islamist militias. The country's capital, meanwhile, is home to a rival leadership, the so-called National Salvation Government headed up by Omar al-Hassi and backed by key Islamist militia Libyan Dawn. Over 40 years of authoritarian rule, followed by a post-Gaddafi power vacuum, have left the country plagued by street battles, assassinations, and more recently, the appearance of the Islamic State organization. With the execution of 21 Coptic Christians by the group over the weekend an alarming sign that their influence has now spread to North Africa, will the international community once again find itself fighting in Libya?
William Jordan, Libya has just marked the 4th anniversary of that beginning of that uprising against Colonel Gaddafi that was so welcomed by Libyans and indeed by the rest of the world. It was impossible to imagine then that the descent into chaos would be quite as spectacular as it's been.
You're right. I don't think it was imagined or expected that it would be quite so spectacular. But I don't think it was. I don't think anybody was so naive as to believe it could be avoided either. The reality in in Libya, is that you have a country that, under the 40-odd years of rule under Muammar Gaddafi, it's basically a country that was deprived of a state. It lost a lot of its institutions, as well as any semblance of civil society or political interaction under the oppressive rule of Colonel Gaddafi. The inevitable power vacuum, and in the absence, remember, Libya was basically created in 1951 by the United Nations as a kingdom. It immediately fell back to what it had been before, which was a loose grouping of regions without much of a real national coherence or identity. And ever since, what we've found is a combination of personal or tribal rivalries, the very real opportunistic play of militia groups and criminal bands, I would say, coming out, and then most recently the impact of extreme religious-based ideology. And so, putting it all back together, I would say that Libya is still far from being as far gone as Syria. But I would say that putting Libya back together is maybe a little bit more difficult than Iraq, but they're kind of in the same place as far as the need for some sort of a political settlement being the basis for any kind of meaningful international intervention of a security nature, or to try to sort out in a meaningful way for the long term peace, stability, and the future of the country.
That is one of the key questions, Mohamed El-Alfy, that poses itself. Is some sort of political reconciliation between what is a de facto divided country possible, since it is the first thing on the step to anything being done by the outside world to take on the Islamic State group?
By the way, the political reconciliation or political solution on the ground, that is exactly, I give you an example. Someone stay on the ground and would like to catch the moon. Now you are facing terrorism, extremist groups. Now we have a recognized government in the east of this country, and is recognized by the international community, by UN, by Security Council, by the superpower in this world. Why, until now, this international community don't like to save military equipment, don't like to save training. Just Egypt to save training for this military and military equipment. We need to cooperate with the international community to play a role in this regard, and also the security in the Mediterranean Sea is not Egyptian responsibility only, but the responsibility of the whole of all countries on the Mediterranean Sea, north and west.
I'd like to come on to that question, and indeed Italy's call that the international community get more involved than it has been so far, that we heard today in the Italian Parliament. First, though, I'd like to bring in Mohamed El-Alfy, who joins us from Tobruk. You're a journalist working there. Is there a sense from what is the internationally recognised government in Tobruk that not enough has been done to help it? And is there any hope at all that it can claw back authority over the rest of Libya at this stage?
Obviously, we need to recognise that the situation in Libya is extremely difficult for any one government and even for the international community. However, the reluctance from the international community to recognise and to help the elected and recognized government in Tobruk has led us to this situation where we have two rival governments in Libya. And I agree that a dialogue and a political settlement is the preferred and the best option forward for Libya. However, we should not be naive to believe that it is easy to achieve. And the other important point that we need to understand is that the Islamic State is not going to wait for us until there is a political settlement. The Islamic State is expanding by the day in Libya. Its influence will increase possibly exponentially over the next few weeks and months. So it is good that we can have a dialogue, or if we can have a political settlement. But at the same time, the threat is real from Islamic State. Their attacks on oil installations, their attacks on Tripoli, the capital itself, on the Corinthia Hotel last month, is a significant development that will continue to happen time and again over the next few weeks and months, while we keep on talking whether we should support the internationally recognized government or not.
Dominique TRINQUAND, I'd like to put that to you. We've seen that footprint of the Islamic State group, although not huge for now. Derna was taken without the world paying the slightest bit of attention to what was happening in Libya. They now seem to be controlling much of Sirte, the birthplace of Colonel Gaddafi, a symbolic taking for them. Even while the world has been looking elsewhere, they've been growing in strength in the country, and as an objective it seems like an important one for them. Of course, the difficulty for the international community as it meets tonight to discuss this is that, as we were just hearing, this is a threat that needs to be dealt with now. And there are simply not, from an institutional point of view or a political point of view in Libya, people capable of doing it, even with the help of the international community.
Yeah, sure. I think the point is very important. It's what the international community wants to achieve in Libya. Either establish peace in Libya or put aside the threat by the Islamic State in Libya, which are two different objectives. Currently, because of what's happening for the last weeks or month in Libya, people are focusing mainly on this threat and want to destroy this threat. And that was Egypt did and the Arab country did in the last weeks. The problem is that we are always focusing on the immediate threat when it is on our side. I mean that Libya 4 years ago, there was an operation. 2 years later, the chaos slowly was established in Libya, and nobody was caring about that. You know, it was Libya, it's the problem of Libyan. And now, because there is a threat, people are looking at that. And the discussion in the Security Council today will be more focusing on what we want to achieve. Because currently the UN is saying we need to have a discussion between the two governments in order to establish who will be helped by the Security Council and who will be helped by the international community.
That question of the aim is the first thing that they're going to work out. We have a tweet from a viewer here that I'd like to show you. Is it fair to say that 4 years after the Arab Spring has proven to be counterproductive, Libya has become a den of terrorists? It goes back to what you were saying a moment ago, that one of the patterns to have emerged from all this is that governments that have countries where there is no history of democracy, at least within living memory, where there are factions that have been held together by force by dictators thus far, have proved remarkably difficult to govern. The difference with Libya is perhaps that, given, as you were just reminding us, there had been a foreign aerial intervention to help with its revolution, perhaps the international community had a debt towards Libya and should have been paying much closer attention to what happened afterwards and remained involved even once Colonel Gaddafi had left.
Well, I'm delighted that you actually asked me that question, because I wanted to jump in on this point. I take strong exception to the idea that the international community somehow pulled away from Libya or left Libya alone or turned its attention to other things. There's no question about it that as the Syrian civil war became more important and as Iraq became, again, a greater source of concern in terms of what's going on there and the Islamic State arising in both of those countries, the international community has been distracted as far as Libya appearing on the front pages of newspapers and getting a lot of attention. But it doesn't mean that there hasn't been considerable effort by the United Nations and by individual governments to try to help Libya along. And indeed, it has only been as you have gone from one crisis to the next inside Libya, as the different factions being within arm's reach of reaching some sort of compromise, some sort of an agreement. And remember, beginning initially very hopefully in putting together some sort of a constitutional basis for a new political reality in that country. It's only been as that has steadily proven to be impossible because the factions concerned have dug in and have gone for broke and have resorted to sort of a classic, I hate to say it, in the Arab world, not exclusively, but certainly in the Arab world, going for all rather than seeking some kind of a compromise. It's only then that we've ended up with the sort of kind of situation where you actually have split governments, a sort of real civil war now, and the UN effort to try to assist Libya in consolidating what was beginning to be a very hopeful and very promising process has now become sort of a rescue mission that appears to be activated at the last minute, but in fact that hasn't been the case. And I can assure you further that as far as the security piece of the puzzle is concerned, the United States, France, and other countries have been ready and have indeed elaborated great plans to train the security forces in Libya, to stand up a professional army and a professional gendarmerie to be able to take on the security requirements But the problem is that this infighting among these militias, and this has been one of the big political stumbling blocks in the country, has proven to be impossible and has led us to where we are today.
And which remains, of course, tonight, even imagining that the international community stick with a relatively moderate aim of helping the internationally recognized government in Tobruk reclaim authority over the whole of Libya. It looks simply in terms of the rival government opposite, currently in Tripoli, and more importantly, the powerful militia behind it, Libya Dawn, impossible for them to be able to convince those rival militia of the need to talk and get together and come under its flag. It's simply not going to happen at this stage.
Let's go to the actual point. Now we have in Tripoli another government is not recognized by the international community, but recognized by Qatar and Turkey and
a grouping just for our viewers of moderate and more extremist Islamists.
Yeah, it's hidden support by United States to the behavior of Turkey and Qatar in this area, and that is mean we have to clarify everything. We have to support. Of course, anyone will, if you will ask any simple person, he will answer you, yes, we need reconciliation inside the country. Of course, that is the hope of everyone. But let's go away from the diplomatic expressions, because that will not lead us to a real solution. Now, the international community or United States, we can't rely on United States or Barack Obama administration, not the United States as a country, because now, if you look to the brief history, America destroyed many countries all over the world under the umbrella of human rights, and then leave this country to the extreme or terrorism or extreme groups. The same thing done in Libya. So now, if they are serious, they must stop Qatar, they must stop Turkey, and by the way, the last point is Barack Obama administration must stop this project in MENA region, and he must go to cooperate with the international community and with the elected government.
We'll come back to you in a moment for your reaction. Just a second, we're going to have a quick break. We'll be right back for the second part of the debate, though.